Welcome back to the another episode of the Biz and the Bees. Today, I have a guest who is a true legend in the entertainment world and someone that I'm proud to call a great friend. Gary Foreman is the co-founder of Rockstar Games, the studio behind generational touchstones like Grand Theft Auto. He's applying that deep technical expertise in world building to totally new frontier at Next Wave, creating immersive VR experiences for critical safety training. Beyond his incredible resume, Gary's someone I've known for nearly 20 years now. We've worked together back at 4mm Games. We've been friends ever since. We recently had a chat about artificial intelligence, and we're going to pick that back up today. Gary, it's awesome to have you on the show, my friend.
It's great to see you again, Phil.
So before we get into sort of the Q&A and the discussion part of this, why don't you tell the folks that are watching a little bit about yourself? I've shared some of your highlights, but I'm sure there's a lot more that I wasn't able to squeeze in.
I think you got the good bits, but no. So I started like making video games a long time ago. A lot of fun, but then I got to a point where I kind of wanted to do like something different, and like, it was around the time I mean, VR's been around for a long time, kinda like pretty much like early '90s, but not really as a kinda consumer focused and kinda like driven in terms of like more of a mass market appeal. And one of the use cases for it, which I find like really fascinating, is actually in education, and specifically the type of work I'm doing now is like workplace safety training, where we can kind of immerse people in environments that are, inherently unsafe because of the nature of kind of, what they're exposed to, but do it in a safe way so that, that we can go through a lot of kind of, training protocol to build up muscle memory. So a lot of people kind of find themselves that they can repeat these kind of, kind of educational kind of snippets. We're not trying to replace existing training, but specifically in a lot of kind of older style kind of education and say construction industry, a lot of that training, it's kind of PowerPoints and videos, and it's not engaging and it's not immersive in the same way. So we found that by using virtual reality, in that we can kind of get more interactivity in there, and then as a result of that, like the engagement goes up and therefore retention goes up, and then we see like people are inherently safer when they go into these kind of work environments. So, as much as we do a number of things for construction, it can be pretty much any industry. We do some things for offshore wind. We do some general kind of logistics, kind of warehousing, healthcare, etc. Like, VR can basically be used in pretty much any environment to kind of, enhance kind of, what has been like, traditional training. So there's a lot of applications there. And, a lot of the technologies we use are like very similar to those used in some video games. So all of that experience that I have kind of, from building them for a long time, a lot of that is directly applicable as well. And, I don't like to say that we kind of gamify things because that I think, sometimes diminishes the application, but we try to make them engaging so they're not just like these kind of unwieldy, kind of hard to kind of understand things. Because a lot of the people kind of using VR training, like they maybe haven't been exposed to video games. So, we have to make it accessible for pretty much anybody.
It really puts it into a more of a contextual experience, right? The PowerPoint is hard to experience that and to see it in context of the thing you're doing. So I can
Yeah.
imagine the VR world makes it a lot easier to get that point across.
It does. I mean, I think that, if people can actually do something in there, we give them the controllers or maybe with their hands and, that they actually get to kind of, go through these kind of like, motions of, performing a task or a number of tasks and kind of doing that. And we can immerse them in environment. It's much better than the passive thing of just looking at a screen and, kind of reading words on it or watching a video. Like the fact that you can feel that you're like fully immersed in that environment, I think is kind of really powerful. And, we've had situations where we have, people that have been in some of our VR experiences that have been in kind of very kind of serious real world environments. And they kind of take the headset off and they're like, oh my God, that was real. And say, I can't like go into details on some of the people that we've had in the experiences, but they've kind of seen some things and like the VR for them was a very visceral experience. So, when we have those kind of reactions, we know we're doing something right.
That's awesome. Well, let's go back to the start. Let's go back to the legacy. You guys at Rockstar built an empire on creating these incredibly detailed, handcrafted worlds with authored stories that felt alive. It was all about the human artistry at massive scale. Now that you've Now you can generate with AI the world, the characters, and the dialogue almost instantly. From your perspective as a world builder, is AI the most powerful creative tool ever invented, or is it, or are we at risk of stripping all the soul and intention out of the experiences? And even in your existing role at Next Wave, this also kind of applies to that as well.
Yeah, I mean, the answer to your kind of two-part question is kind of both. You know, it can really help us kind of build environments that can be, kind of rich and, a lot of the challenge in kind of, making, content, like in terms of like interactive content, is building out the worlds. There's a lot of, if you're going for like highly stylized environments, you maybe don't have to invest so much in that content creation like traditionally with like people spending weeks, months, years kind of building out all these things. So AI definitely helps to kind of speed up that process. We have to be careful obviously that where we're using it, that we're not kind of plagiarizing stuff. Like a lot of kind of early AI in terms of a lot of text, a lot of it has been taught and trained on like existing content. So we have to be very careful and mindful of the kind of ethical uses in terms of kind of like, not stealing somebody's IP. Uh, but, if we can kind of have, kind of some confidence that we're not doing that, there is a great ability for us to actually use it to generate environments that might otherwise take a long time. And along the way, we've always been able to kind of write our own code to kind of build procedural worlds. AI is kind of automating some of that. So as much as it's this kind of black box for a lot of people. Like, with specifically in kind of what we're building, we're seeing it just as a way of kind of like taking us one step away from having to write that code to kind of generate these things ourselves. And there's just a conversational tool that we can, you write a prompt and it can then like, iterate on that to go build these environments, and it's not just the environments themselves. Like, we can use it to build, fire extinguishers and ladders and, like all sorts of things like that. And, a lot of the props that we kind of build in there, like, we want them to be realistic, but not kind of too realistic because obviously there's IP involved in a lot of content as well. And as much as it might be great to have, pick a brand of, fire extinguisher, like, we aren't specifically kind of like, targeting one particular model. So we have to be careful to kind of be slightly removed from there. So, we've always kind of been mindful of kind of that. And, we make sure that when we are using these tools to generate it, that we're doing in a way that, it looks close enough, but it isn't an exact replica, and that's what it is. And unless we, we find ourselves sometimes in situations where we are working with people that have their own kind of specific models that they want to use, and then maybe for a piece of equipment or something like that, and they'll then just provide us the CAD drawings, or if it's a building, a BIM. So there's a lot of things that and we can kind of ingest all of that data and use it for kind of generating our worlds in terms of doing that, and that can help us. But at the same time, the level of detail that, a literally building has, it says, we've had situations where, we've been provided with this detail and there's just way too much of it for, the thin slice that we actually need for it. So it's being able to kind of like break that down as well. And I think that, it's finding that kind of like so the kind of sweet spot between like we've got way too much information that we can't use, but we want to make something quite accurate, and let's be able to kind of tease out just a little bit that is kind of pertinent to the particular application. And AI can kind of help us with some of that as well, because you sometimes you can't see the wood for the trees because there's just so much there in trying to pick things out. And having something like a tool that can kind of like take a step back and say like, okay, I see everything here. Like, tell me what you're particularly focused on, and it can be very, very good at like, picking out specific things, or an example of, and sure, it's going to get it wrong, but you can correct it and you can kind of go through and iterate to find what you need. So the tools are definitely beneficial, but we have to be super careful.
I think that the ability to iterate faster, that's where I see a lot of benefit in this. It's not that it's correct, but look, even when you or I do something, it's very rarely do we iterate to the final answer first, right? You don't get to the end in one shot in most cases. So I think knowing that you can iterate and move through at a greater pace really shines a light on the power of where AI is going to be helpful, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely seeing a lot of benefits in terms of, the kind of, in quotes, force multiplier, like, the productivity gains and the efficiency, like, it's not replacing, say what I do with my kind of development hat on, I still have to think about like, I want to build X, like I want it to work in a certain way. I have to be able to describe that, but now I can, sometimes you maybe describe it to like somebody else on the team and you say, hey, like this is what we're trying to do. And maybe you could kind of sketch something out. Like now we have like, these tools can kind of act like some of those kind of people,
Yeah.
in certain roles. And again, like they're not able to do absolutely everything, but they can help with a lot of the kind of like mundane, kind of boilerplate stuff that, when we're writing code, there's always a lot of like that stuff, which is like, it's not difficult. It just takes time to do. So what we're finding is, we can expedite a lot of those things. And also, have these tools to kind of like, review things and kind of maintain consistency. Like that's the hardest thing when you work in a team as well. Like if somebody does it slightly different to like the agreed practices, we have a lot of like tools, and we've had them for a long time, but now we can automate them and have them just built in and kind of they automatically run without having to kind of point out to somebody, oh, we need to set aside time to do X. It's like, now it's an ongoing thing. It's just part of the process, and all of those benefits, I think we're really kind of helping to reap a lot of the kind of rewards for kind of being able to kind of implement some of those things.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that. So this kind of gets us into the next topic, the right way versus the wrong way. You and I were kind of talking about this the other day, and you had some strong opinions and thoughts on that. So let's kind of dig into the how in your mind. What's the bright red line between a team using AI properly versus improperly? And where do you see the differences between using it in a smart, creative co-pilot sort of fashion and using it as a crutch that ultimately leads to generic, uninspired content?
Yeah, I mean, I think not for us, it's not thinking about it, say from a code perspective. Like, as much as I love writing code, I do it pretty much every day. I love doing it. But, when I'm trying to kind of solve a problem, like the focus is on what the problem is. And sometimes that is the answer is like you don't need to write code. You can like change the process, whatever it is. But it's always kind of taking that approach and, not writing code for code's sake. And, that's just a means to an end in terms of kind of what we need to do to get like the desired result, whether it's like, streamlining an existing process or building in some new one or kind of like, joining two disparate parts of a pipeline that, somebody says, I've got this like content, but somebody else is like, well, I need it in this other format. So translating that data, like a lot of that. So, we find ourselves looking at like ways to kind of like, solve those workflow issues as well to kind of speed up the process and just improve efficiency. So I think we need to be careful not to just kind of like, you know, use AI to kind of generate like, gigabytes of content just for the sake of it. Like it has to be meaningful, it has to be thoughtful in terms of, kind of what we're building. And, it's not like I built it because I can. It's like, no, like you build it because you need it. Like the bigger challenge I see is kind of people not going crazy and just building out like, lots of stuff that isn't relevant. So for us, a lot of what we're doing, like as much as, the VR headsets are kind of way more comfortable these days and kind of, the battery life still isn't great if they're kind of not tethered. But we try to kind of keep people out of VR as much as possible, as ironic that may sound, because, we don't want people to kind of be immersed for too long because of the fatigue of kind of being there. But, we don't want to kind of keep that novelty aspect either. But it's just, again, keep, building enough content to keep them in to kind of like tick all the boxes we need to for the, the kind of the outcomes for these kind of learning objectives that they have in there, but to do like just the right amount. We want to focus on what they're actually trying to do and not just like, here's a world, go wander around and do your thing. Like again, on the entertainment space, like that makes more sense. But using it for what we're doing, it's about like, focusing on the actual like desired outcome. So we have to be careful, like, not to kind of over engineer things as well. Like, software's never finished ultimately. Like, find me a developer that kind of writes something and kind of says it can't be improved. Like, there's always going to be a way, and like whatever metric you use for improvement, whether you're writing code or writing words like on a page, whatever, like there's always a point where you get to where, and a lot of my kind of artist friends kind of hate when I kept putting this out, but like, there's this idea of good enough. Like, I could spend like all day, every day writing like a program. And after a certain point, it's going to be good, but I could spend more time like improving it for various things, like improving it for performance or improving it for maintainability, or, whether we're, building something to work on lots of different devices that have their own little quirks, like building in a way so that, it's applicable kind of in that kind of way. So you're kind of, writing on something maybe slightly kind of abstracted from the actual hardware, but, you don't want to be always targeting a specific thing, because it's the market opportunities, and there's a lot of options that you kind of like maybe kind of have to like move away from if you don't kind of have that kind of open approach. And writing software means that I could write for a particular device a particular time, but that has a finite life. So what we try to do is build systems, and design things in a way so that, as new versions come along, if new manufacturers come along for the hardware, we can like apply the same content, you know, fairly easily to that, and fairly easily as a, broad term in
Yeah,
terms of what it
it's
is. But, we try to make the additional lift for adding new platforms kind of, quite minimal, so that if, a client comes along and say, "Hey, we've got these headsets, like, can you make, your content work on them?" And if it's something we haven't done in the past, like, it's not gonna be like, "Yeah, come back in a year and we'll build it." It's like, no, like, often it's like we sold one tiny piece of that, and then all of the content gets applied to it. So again, it's engineering in a way that we're trying to, kind of solve the bigger problems, but to do it in a way that, kind of abstracts a lot of that kind of detail from the actual learning part of it, because that shouldn't change.
yeah. There's the enemy of the idea of perfecting it is the enemy of process of progress in a lot of cases. So I like this sort of 80-20 or 90-10 rule of it's good and it's good enough. And that doesn't mean a reduction of quality. It just means we've reached a usefulness of improving, right?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think that's I think it's an important distinction.
Yeah, I get kind of very pedantic on so many things actually, but when we're talking about things like good enough, or somebody sees something as like, oh, that's cheap, and it's like I always have to like, no, it's, and sometimes it is cheap, but cheap for me is a connotation. It means it's like it's inferior quality, and something might be just less expensive, and I think we have to be careful to make some of those distinctions, and it goes with that kind of whole good enough thing as well. Again, I could spend another week on a piece of code. Is it gonna get a week better? Like, from the user experience, like, is there, like, that additional polish? Like, is that justifiable in terms of kind of, the time? And obviously, we're balancing pressures of, multiple projects, and we're trying to do, like, many things at the same time. And it's like, if I spend a week on this one thing, like, will it be noticeably different to justify that? Because in my head, I want everything to be perfect, but also in my head, it's like nothing ever will be, because we have to get to a point where, like, it's enough.
Well, will it make you any more money? That becomes the real question, right? Will it make a
Life
difference on
isn't
the
about
revenue
money,
model?
Philip. It's about doing the right thing and, like, giving people kind of what they need to make their lives richer. But
I hear you.
if we can get paid for it as well, then sure. Yeah, I'll
Yeah,
take some
but
money.
we all need
Yeah,
toys though. So there's
absolutely,
that.
yeah. Yeah.
There's that. Awesome. All right, so let's go to the last question here. From entertainment to the real world impact. Thinking about the teams that build these worlds at Rockstar, you were building for a narrative and entertainment, and now at Next Wave, you're building for immersive VR for high stakes training and safety. How does the role of AI and the type of talent you need change when the goals shift from telling a great story to, say, accurately simulating a dangerous real world situation or scenario? Um, what's the primary difference in those two types of people?
Uh, there really isn't much of a difference. I mean, in terms of the story and the kind of the narrative, like for like an entertainment like medium, like whether it's, video games or movies or books or whatever, like you're obviously telling a story in a different way. But even for us in the, the kind of the VR training that we're making, like we are still telling some sort of story. We're engaging users and we're trying to kind of like, assume that they have like no experience of VR. So we have to be very careful of like, okay, how we present the world to them. We do a lot of voiceovers, we give them like on-screen instructions, and obviously we can like localize that in multiple languages, and AI helps with a lot of that kind of generating kind of that content there. But what we try to do is to kind of give them like that same experience. So we have to like show them the controls, show them like how they use it. And what we try to do is something that was has been done in video games for the the longest time, is like you layer on the complexity. Like you start with the very first simple thing. It's like, okay, here's what you do: press this to walk. Now press this other thing to grab, press this other thing to throw, etc., etc. So it's all about kind of layering on the complexity so that people aren't kind of overwhelmed at the beginning in terms of doing that. And that's, exactly the sort of thing that would be done in a video game environment. The main difference is, for the high-end video games these days, PlayStation 5 and PC and Xbox, it's like, they have like, you know, up until recently and even now, like hundreds or sometimes thousands of people creating content, because these virtual worlds are like, massively complex, highly detailed. I think we see a lot of more of a push now to generate a lot more of that content. So I think the number of creators, like human creators, will go down, but you'll still need a lot of people there to kind of maintain a quality and that kind of visual fidelity and kind of like, that art style to maintain all of those things. So, you're not going to replace like whole teams with AI to do that, and for us, we're doing it on a much smaller scale. Our experiences are, 15 to 20 minutes, like for anyone's thing. And like, they're very focused in terms of the content. We don't have big sprawling worlds. We may have a large construction site or a big warehouse or something like that. But again, like they're finite, and and that helps us again to go back to the focus. So the amount of effort required in team size is kind of very different for us, but it's a function of, like you define the scope. For us, like we always try to limit the scope because it's a, hit the key learning objectives. But in terms of like what you're building, when you decide and kind of agree with, if it's an external client, it's like, okay, this is what we're going to build. Then you figure out, okay, like how do we resource that? And some of that will be, okay, we want this to be live in 4 months, 6 months, whatever it might be. And then you figure out how many people it takes to do that. We'll say, okay, we want it in 6 weeks, for example. That changes the game in terms of, no pun intended, in terms of like what we actually then need to do. And it's like, okay, now we need to add more bodies into certain aspects of that to speed up kind of elements of it. But, we still have the challenge of, you can't, throw like too many bodies at something and get it done in a really small space of time. And like building software is, not too different in some ways than building other things. You have to start with like kind of foundations and then kind of build on top of that. And one of the analogies I like to use when, let's use for some numbers there. So if say we have, a program and we've got the certain scope, whatever, and we think, okay, in terms of the programming part of it, we think there's maybe 9 months of work, you know, in terms of doing that. What somebody said, "Well, 9 months is way too long, like, can we add more people to kinda speed that up?" And you can add maybe double that number of developers, and then you say, "Okay, let that will that half the time?" Is like, half, not quite half, but a little bit more because there's interactions, so you do that. But say, "Well, okay, but that's still too long, like, can we add, like, say, like, 9 programmers, and they spend, like, a month each to do all the things?" So, like, that's not really possible either because, again, we have all of these, like, interactions, and that, like, as you add more people, the complexity of those things there. So you get, like, limited kind of returns in terms of, like, the force multiplier that you wanna actually do. And, like, the analogy I try to use is that, well, a baby typically takes 9 months. Okay, that's why I chose 9. 9 months. You can't have 9 women spend a month to make a baby. It doesn't work like that. So again, like software is not the same, but it's, that kind of analogy. So for non-technical people to try to get them to understand is like, we have to get kind of some kind of like place in between where we're seeing some efficiencies. And if we can break a project down and have kind of discrete components that can be developed in kind of like partial isolation, that can help us. But, it doesn't mean that we can throw bodies at something, whether they're like human bodies or with now AI to kind of expedite some of those things to do that. And the reason I mention that is that, we are seeing a lot of conversations now about, well, with the advent of AI, can we kind of get, like a developer with, 3 or 4 AI assistants to kind of help and really speed up and kind of, make them go like 10 times, 100 times faster. And the answer isn't definitely no, it's a maybe, but we have to be careful because again, like how we force the AI to kind of give us the results we need, has to be much more carefully thought out because, again, like that happens in a team, typically with humans. And we have to make sure that we're, kind of maintaining that sort of control. I mean, I've seen like situations recently where people are using agents to kind of write bits of code and the agents are communicating with each other to do that sort of stuff. And, there've been some moderate successes in some of that, but there's been some spectacular failures because, AI is really good at generating lots and lots and lots of code. A lot of the time it doesn't work or it doesn't work fully as intended. And there's all these edge cases, and you end up with this like spaghetti code that when a human goes there to try to fix some of the bugs, it's like, this is a mess. You know how I'm going to solve it? I'm going to delete it all and start again fresh. And again, you have to be careful in terms of like how you use AI and how much leeway you give it, and and basically give it very kind of strict guide rails in terms of like, this is how you're going to do something. You're going to preserve this style, you're gonna like, this convention, and you can feed it documents that kind of lay all these things out where we have like coding practice and like all sorts of other guidelines for building content. Like, as long as you build that into your process, you can see a lot more things come out and get like meaningful results that do have value. But, from what I've seen the last like couple of years, and certainly the last year or so with the big large language models come out, like people are just like spending like massive amounts of compute and not really getting anything for it. Like, everybody goes in chat GPT, I'm gonna blah blah blah, and like and they're asking it like, what is the weather? What time is it? It's like, are you kidding? Just like, that's yes, it will do that, although sometimes it really can't. There've been some spectacular fails in that area as well. But again, it's like we're not using it for what it's really good at, but up until recently, I mean, now, like, I've been playing with something kinda quite recently that I'm very impressed with, and it does, like, a very good job at kinda getting a good view of the overall project and the things that it can suggest. It's not like, "Go do this one thing," it's presenting a couple of options and pros and cons and explaining why something is a better, like, choice than something else, and that's the impressive part. Like, where you would have a conversation with somebody and say, like, I would do it this way, they would do it that way. It's like, well, okay, can yours do XYZ? This person can do XYZ. And like, you, the AI is presenting all of these things to you so you can then make like an educated kind of, guess decision, and follow it through. And then like when that doesn't work, you can go back and say, okay, that didn't work. What about something else? And, these tools now you can iterate on and get them to give you, kind of like so many more options, and they help to kind of speed up that thought process because, often it's like, I have an idea what I want to do, but, it can kind of go away and try it for you and then, tell you like, this is what happened. And then you're like, oh, okay, that didn't really work. But you don't have to spend as much time going down these kind of rabbit holes that, don't really lead anywhere. So again, it's that boost of productivity that is the real valuable part right now.
Well, I'm going to ask, what tool is that? Is that something you share?
Um, yeah, I mean, it's very specific to what we're using. So all
Okay.
of our VR stuff is built with Unity. It could be
Okay.
just as easily built with Unreal, but again, the iteration times that we find is like really, really good, and it's cross-platform. It's pretty much device agnostic. Is really so. This tool is quite new. It's called Bezzy, Bezi, or Bezi for the people that speak real English, and it's just really good. It takes like a kind of, a high level view of the project, of the content, like, how the scene is kind of composed, what's in there. It understands about, all of the things that would hurt performance. It can look at the code, it can confirm
Well,
whether
that's
you're
cool.
doing things approved ways. Like, it'll go like do web searches while it's like finding things out as well, and it's doing that in kind of real time. And it goes, consult the documentation of the underlying platform or whatever to kind of give all these things. And it's just, again, it works really good because it's very kind of deeply integrated in the tool. Even though ironically it's a separate app right now, which is one of the things I would suggest to them is like, can you just build it in? Because that would be even nicer.
Right.
But yeah, it's but we have multiple screens, so it doesn't matter anymore.
Very cool. Well, I appreciate you sharing that. That's awesome. Um, we could talk about this for hours and hours as we did the other day.
Yep.
However, it's clear that no matter how powerful the technology gets, the need for human taste, vision, and intention isn't really going anywhere. Anything else you want to share with our listeners before we head out?
I mean, really, it's, AI can be really powerful, but we have to be careful with not thinking of it as the panacea. Like, it's not going to be the catch-all solution for everything, and it can expedite a lot of what we're doing and kind of help us to be more efficient and more productive. But I don't think it's anywhere near being able to replace like the critical thinking and the kind of conceptual, kind of creative kind of aspects of what we do, kind of anytime soon. So, don't be scared of it, but, don't also be kind of so, blasé. It's like, it's never going to replace me. I think at some point, like, a lot of roles, I think, will be replaced, but not necessarily taking people out of the equation. It's just that they'll just be doing other things that are maybe more specific, in terms of, again, because the ideas, the creativity is there, and all of the kind of touch points along the way. Like, the algorithms like will take some time to kind of get to that point, I think.
Very cool. Well, listen, for our listeners who want to keep up with what you've been up to and where you guys are headed next, where can they find? Where's the easiest place to find you and more information about Next Wave?
I mean, as much as the company is Next Wave that we refer to as, our little division is called NXR Technologies. So you can go to nxr.nyc because we are in New York City, and we have a little website there. There are links there. People can get in touch and ask questions. So yeah, it's always happy to talk to people about technology, how it can help our process, and specifically like where it comes to kind of enhancing the training that people can have in kind of potentially dangerous situations, and we can hopefully get people home safe at night.
Awesome. Well, we'll be sure to link to that site for you guys on our notes here for the show. A huge thanks, Gary. I appreciate you
Thank you
coming
so
in
much.
and sharing your insight with the audience of the Biz and the Bees. If you guys all enjoyed this conversation, please hit that subscribe button below, and we'll see you next time.